Connecticut. By area, it's the third smallest state in the entire United States, yet is home to millions of residents. An old and historic state, it's today a center of the U.S. financial industry. Despite its small size, Connecticut has a unique culture, divided between New England and the New York metro area. Home to a beautiful coastline, densely populated urban areas, as well as plenty of countryside, Connecticut is the fifth place I will talk about in the U.S. Explained, a 56-part series on every state, territory, and federal district in the country, by order of admission. One quick side note, sorry that I haven't uploaded a U.S. Explained video in a while. In the future, I will try to pick up the pace on uploading, while also keeping them high quality. Hello and welcome to That Is Interesting. I'm your host Carter. This is the U.S. Explained, Episode 5, Connecticut. Connecticut sits in the humid continental climate region, which gives it 4 seasons, with summers being hot and winters cold and snowy, according to the Köppen climate classification, which breaks down the world into regions based on their climate. Located in the northeast, it on average has a colder temperature and gets more rain than the rest of the U.S. Connecticut is nicknamed the Constitution State. While you might think this name comes from the U.S. Constitution, it in fact originates from another document called the Fundamental Orders, which was potentially the first colonial constitution in what would eventually become the United States. The U.S. Constitution, in turn, was inspired in part by the Fundamental Orders, giving the state its nickname. Early European settlers in Connecticut also became known for selling fake nutmeg made of wood. This was potentially due to customers trying to crack the nutmeg open instead of grating it. Whether the story is true or not, Connecticut became associated with nutmeg, and the state is today unofficially nicknamed the Nutmeg State, with residents sometimes half-jokingly referred to as nutmeggers. The word Connecticut is an anglicized version of a Mohegan word for the region, which translates to the place of the long tidal river. The river it refers to bears the same name, the Connecticut River, and is the longest and arguably one of the most important rivers in New England. It begins in New Hampshire, in a tiny pond just below the border with Quebec, and flows south, making up nearly all of the New Hampshire-Vermont border. It then continues through Massachusetts and Connecticut, leaving behind a flat agricultural river valley home to important New England cities like Springfield and Hartford, before entering Long Island Sound between the Connecticut towns of Old Saybrook and Old Lyme, a town that has the unfortunate distinction of giving its name to Lyme disease. Connecticut's flag is one of many to use elements of the state seal on a dark blue background. Despite it not being exactly like the state seal, placing its 3 grapevines on a shield instead of an oval, Connecticut's flag can be difficult to distinguish from the many other state flags with a similar look. The 3 grapevines represent either the 3 British colonies that Connecticut was formed from, Connecticut, New Haven, and Saybrook, or the 3 original towns in the Connecticut colony, Hartford, Windsor, and Wethersfield. In my opinion, they add a pretty unique look to the flag, leaving it less cluttered and giving it a better look than many of the other dark blue state flags. Connecticut takes up a land area of just 4,842 square miles, or 12,542 square kilometers, a similar area to Vanuatu, Qatar, or Jamaica. This makes it the 3rd smallest state in the entire country, larger than just Delaware and Rhode Island. In fact, a stunning 63 counties in the United States take up more land than Connecticut. And that isn't even counting Alaska's enormous boroughs and census areas, as the state doesn't have counties, which would bring the number up to 84. However, many of the New England states located around Connecticut, such as Massachusetts and Rhode Island, also take up a similarly small amount of land, so it isn't completely engulfed by its neighbors. In terms of population, however, Connecticut is home to 3.557 million people, giving it a greater population than 21 other states, as well as the U.S. territories and the District of Columbia. Despite its small size, more people live in Connecticut than states like Nevada, Utah, and Iowa, which are far larger in terms of area. This contributes to the state having one of the highest population densities in the country, 741 people per square mile, or 286 per square kilometer, a similar density to the UK or Vietnam. only 3 other states, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and New Jersey, and 30 countries, have a greater population density than Connecticut. The state is located in the northeastern United States, in the region of New England. It borders only 3 other states. To its east lies Rhode Island, which it shares a small maritime border with. An offshore sandbar called Sandy Point Island is actually divided between the 2 states. The Connecticut-Rhode Island border then heads inland at the mouth of the Pawcatuck River, following the river upstream for about 10 miles or 16 kilometers before leaving it and turning north in a mostly straight line for about 41 miles or 66 kilometers. Most of Connecticut's eastern border is shared with Rhode Island, save for the northernmost mile, which it shares with Massachusetts. Massachusetts, though, primarily sits on Connecticut's northern border, which is about 86 miles or 139 kilometers in length. While it appears at first to be a straight line, take a closer look at the Connecticut-Massachusetts border and you'll see what appears to be 2 notches carved out of Connecticut. The largest of them is called the Southwick Jog, and was formed due to a bad 17th century surveying job. Long story short, the border was placed too far to the south, giving Massachusetts land that should have belonged to Connecticut. Connecticut wasn't happy with it, and it led to a long-standing dispute about where the border between the 2 states should be located. Connecticut eventually prevailed, but settlers from Massachusetts had already founded several towns in land that Massachusetts had claimed at the time, but had since been agreed on as part of Connecticut. Connecticut allowed some of these communities, including one called Southwick, which became the Southwick Jog, to remain a part of Massachusetts, giving the state an oddly shaped northern border. To Connecticut's west, it borders New York. Most of the border is a slightly diagonal line that eventually turns inward before making a sharp turn to the southwest and another to the southeast, running perpendicular to Long Island Sound until it meets the Byram River, which it follows for just 1.5 miles to the ocean. This creates the Connecticut Panhandle, a distinctive section of the state jutting out into New York. Its existence is due to a border dispute between the 2 from their time as colonies. Both claimed much of the area around what is today the 2 states' borders, including the Connecticut Panhandle. Eventually, a line was agreed upon. However, many settlers from Connecticut were living in a coastal area west of the new border, in what was decided to be part of New York, in towns like Greenwich. These towns, whose residents identified with Connecticut, did not want to be part of New York, so in response, the 2 colonies agreed to change the border, giving Connecticut what became the Panhandle, and giving New York the town of Rye, a coastal town founded by settlers from Connecticut, as well as a thin stretch of land called the Oblong that sat directly beside the Connecticut-New York border, essentially pushing the border slightly to the east. This geographic anomaly has turned out to be pretty influential for Connecticut. While small, the Connecticut Panhandle is home to around 320,000 people, or just under 10% of the state population. Finally, to the south, Connecticut sits on Long Island Sound, at times just 6 miles from Long Island, the most populous island in the country as well as the largest in the contiguous U.S. Due to Long Island's presence across the Sound, Connecticut shares a maritime border with New York to the south. Fisher's Island, sitting just 2 miles off the Connecticut coastline, is also a part of New York due to this maritime boundary. Interestingly, Connecticut actually claimed ownership of part of Long Island, as well as a thin strip of land extending from the other side of New York in what is now northeastern Pennsylvania, all the way to the Pacific. Their claims were never successful, but people from Connecticut actually settled in Pennsylvania's Wyoming Valley, the area where Scranton is located, as well as a large section of northern Ohio along Lake Erie, where Cleveland is today. They called it the Connecticut Western Reserve, and today Case Western Reserve University, located in Cleveland, is named after it. As a colony, Connecticut even went to war for 30 years with Pennsylvania over control of the territory they both claimed, known as the Pennamite-Yankee War. However, the 30-year-long conflict only saw 3 deaths. The state is divided into just 8 counties, 4 in the northern part of the state and 4 in the southern part. Only Rhode Island, Hawaii, and Delaware have fewer. The northwestern part of the state is more mountainous. home to ranges of the Appalachians or Appalachians like the Taconics and the Berkshires, which the Green Mountains are known as outside of Vermont. This part of the state is home to Connecticut's highest point, which is actually not a mountain peak, but a slope of a mountain whose summit sits across the state line in Massachusetts. The Appalachian Trail runs through Connecticut, and due to the presence of the Appalachians in Connecticut and some of its neighbors, much of the state is covered in hills, which are generally smaller in its eastern and southern parts, further from the mountains. Overall, though, Connecticut's mountains aren't as tall as some other New England states further to the north, such as Maine, New Hampshire, and Vermont. The flattest section of the state, in addition to the coastline, is the Connecticut River Valley, which cuts from north to south down the center of the state, and is the heart of New England's agricultural industry. In addition to farmland, the area around the Connecticut River is also a major urban center, home to Connecticut's capital city, Hartford, an urban area home to over 900,000 people. Most of the hills in Connecticut are foothills of mountain ranges further to the north in Vermont and New Hampshire. As such, most of its rivers flow north to south, and many, such as the Connecticut, Housatonic, and Thames in Connecticut, not Thames, begin in other states, and much of the water that falls in New England meets the ocean in Connecticut. This, coupled with the state's hilly topography, contributes to a jagged coastline, filled with bays, rocks, and small islands. It lies within the northeast megalopolis, a string of urban areas stretching from Washington, D.C. to Boston, which, due to early settlement from European colonists, as well as numerous bays and rivers which made it a suitable location for trade and industry, led the northeastern U.S., Connecticut included, to grow into a highly developed and urbanized region. As well as a large population, many of these states, divided up early on as colonies, are much smaller in terms of area than states located further to the west. It's no surprise that the 7 most densely populated states in the U.S. are all located in the northeast megalopolis. Connecticut is also unique in that it lacks an obvious population center. While many northeastern states such as Massachusetts, Rhode Island, or New York have one clear urban core, Connecticut is home to multiple small and medium-sized cities whose urban areas frequently overlap. In the state's southwest is its most populous county, Fairfield County, which includes the Connecticut Panhandle. It directly borders New York and sits just 10 miles or 16 kilometers from the city limits of New York City. It's a suburban area, with many residents commuting by train into New York. Often referred to as the Gold Coast, some of the wealthiest Americans live in Fairfield County, and the coastal suburban area is incredibly well off. However, it is also home to some of the highest income inequality in the U.S. In fact, in only 5 counties in the entire country is the ratio between the wealthiest 1% of residents and the rest of the population higher than in Fairfield County. Cities in Fairfield County like Greenwich, Norwalk, Fairfield, Danbury, and 2 of the state's most populous, Stamford and Bridgeport, all sit well within the orbit of New York City, contributing to a cultural divide in the state between the greater New York area and New England. Not far east of Bridgeport, the continuous string of coastal Connecticut cities ends with New Haven, a city on Long Island Sound with over 500,000 residents in its urban area. While mid-sized satellite cities of New York dominate the coastline until that point, from New Haven on, the Connecticut coast is more rural, home to small coastal towns and villages. I've only been to Connecticut one time and just passed through on the train, so its coastline was the only part of the state that I've seen. But it was an incredibly beautiful and scenic area. The largest cities in the more rural eastern part of Connecticut are the coastal town of New London and Norwich, which sits further upstream on the Thames, one of the state's most prominent waterways. The northeastern and northwestern parts of Connecticut are significantly more rural, home to small towns and farms in the state's many hills and valleys. In fact, Windham County in northeastern Connecticut is sometimes referred to as the Quiet Corner, a rare rural stretch in the highly urbanized northeast megalopolis. In the north-central section of the state, the Connecticut River Valley is a major center of both agriculture and population. It's home to Hartford, Connecticut's capital and the anchor of the largest urban area located completely within the state, home to nearly 1 million people, as well as smaller cities like Middletown and New Britain. A string of cities extending from New York to New Haven continues northeast through the valley to Hartford, around 25 miles away from New Haven. Through the valley to the north, the suburbs of Springfield, the second largest urban area in Massachusetts, home to over 600,000 people, sprawl across the border into Connecticut, adding to the already large population of the Connecticut River Valley. Despite taking up a relatively small area, Connecticut was home to numerous native peoples. The Nipmuc lived in the state's northeast, the Mohegan, Pequot, and western Nahantic in the southeast, the part of Connecticut around the Thames River. Southwestern Connecticut was home to the Wappinger. The Lenape lived near what is today Connecticut's border with New York, as well as the Connecticut Panhandle. Outside of the Panhandle, southwest Connecticut was inhabited by the Pagusset, Pequannock, Mohican, Quinnipiac, and Hammonassets. The Pocumtuck mostly lived in what is now western Massachusetts, but inhabited parts of northern Connecticut as well. The area around Hartford, the Connecticut River Valley, was home to many indigenous peoples as well, such as the Massacos, Tunxus, Wangunks, Podunks, and Pequannock. As European colonists began settling in what is now North and South America, they spread diseases like smallpox that the native people of the Americas had not been exposed to, which in addition to violent colonial expansion was responsible for the deaths of millions. Connecticut was home to one of the most horrific atrocities committed against the native people of North America, the Mystic Massacre, which occurred during the brutal Pequot War. Hundreds of Pequot people were killed, most of whom were civilians who were not involved at all in the war, after colonial forces set fire to a fortified Pequot village with hundreds of people trapped inside, near what is today the coastal town of Mystic, not far from New London. Today, the Pequot people, along with the Nipmuc, Wangunk, Quinnipiac, Mohegan, and Pagusset, still reside in Connecticut. Many of Connecticut's other indigenous tribes no longer exist. Some survivors from those tribes banded together and became known as the Scotticoke people, who live today in western Connecticut along the New York border. The first European colony to send colonists to Connecticut was the Netherlands, with Dutch settlers establishing several settlements in the area, including a fort known as the Hege de Hoop in what is now Hartford. Although New Netherland claimed much of what is today western Connecticut, they were unable to hold on to it for very long, and never gained as strong a foothold in Connecticut as in New York. Some settlers living in the British colonies of Massachusetts Bay and Plymouth wanted to leave the increasingly crowded Boston area and began leaving for more rural parts of New England. They established numerous towns in the fertile Connecticut River Valley, as well as along both shores of Long Island Sound, the land claimed by New Netherland. 3 of these towns, Windsor, Wethersfield, and Hartford, were founded by a Puritan preacher named Thomas Hooker, who referred to them as the River Colony, and later the Connecticut Colony. Connecticut wasn't the only colony in the area founded by settlers leaving Massachusetts and Plymouth. At the mouth of the Connecticut River sat the colony of Saybrook, and centered around a large inlet on Long Island Sound was New Haven, which also controlled settlements in what is now Connecticut's Gold Coast, near New York and on Long Island. Connecticut bought Saybrook in 1644, and though the New Haven colony lasted longer, the coastal colony's lack of good agricultural areas made it a challenge to survive on its own, and it joined Connecticut in 1664. Forming the predecessor of the state we know today. The site of the New Haven colony is today the modern city of the same name. In 1687, Britain merged the colonies located in New England, as well as New York and New Jersey, together into the Dominion of New England, taking away the charters that established each as a colony. This infuriated Connecticut's leaders, one of whom, Captain Joseph Wadsworth, during a tense meeting with a royal official, ran out and hid the charter in a hole inside a nearby oak tree. The tree, known as the Charter Oak, is today a common symbol of Connecticut. On January 9, 1788, Connecticut became the 5th state to ratify the U.S. Constitution and join the United States, just 1 week after the previous state to do so, Georgia. During the Constitutional Convention, 2 of Connecticut's delegates resolved disagreements over how each state should be represented in the legislative branch in what was known as the Connecticut Compromise, giving the U.S. the bicameral legislature it has today, with a House of Representatives based on population, and a Senate in which each state has 2 senators. Though northeastern states like Connecticut were some of the earliest to outlaw slavery, with Connecticut banning the slave trade shortly before it became a state, it only abolished slavery very gradually, with some black people still suffering enslavement in Connecticut as late as 1857. In 1839, a group of Mende people from Sierra Leone were imprisoned in New Haven. They'd been kidnapped and forced on a boat called La Amistad, headed to a life of enslavement in the Caribbean. While on board, led by a man named Sangbe Pie, or Sinke, they'd freed themselves and taken control of the ship. Though Sinke ordered the ship back to Sierra Leone, the slave traders navigating La Amistad took it to Connecticut. The plight of the Amistad's captives, whose enslavement the U.S. Supreme Court ruled to be illegal, helped further the cause of abolition and emancipation. Today, a replica of the Amistad, as well as a memorial to slave people on board it, are both located in New Haven. Connecticut was an industrial powerhouse, with its factories and textile mills playing a major role in the Industrial Revolution. In addition, its long coastline is dotted with excellent bays and harbors, along with rivers that cut deep into New England, such as the Housatonic, Quinnipiac, Thames, and Connecticut. This has led the state to become a center of shipbuilding and seafaring, producing thousands of ships, and has developed a maritime culture. Connecticut was a major location for whaling, specifically in the city of New London. Not far from New London, in the town of Groton, sits USS Nautilus, the world's first nuclear submarine. Nearby Mystic is home to the Mystic Seaport, a full-scale replica of an old Connecticut port town. In addition, the first helicopter ever flown did so in the town of Stratford, just east of Bridgeport. While you likely don't think of Connecticut when it comes to gambling, the state is home to the Foxwoods Resort Casino, owned by the Pequot, the second largest casino in the United States, and the 4th largest in the world, a massive complex far larger than any casino in famous gambling cities like Las Vegas, Reno, or Atlantic City, as well as the slightly smaller Mohegan Sun, owned by the Mohegan people, which is the United States' 3rd largest casino. Though it doesn't always have that reputation, Connecticut is one of the more diverse states in the country, with Black and Latino Americans making up a large percentage of Connecticut's population. Located not far from Ellis Island, the historical center of immigration into the East Coast, Connecticut has become home to many immigrants to the U.S., from countries like Jamaica, India, the Dominican Republic, Poland, Ecuador, and Italy, with more of Western Connecticut's residents tracing their ancestry back to Italian immigrants than those from any other country. In addition, 3.28% of Connecticut's residents are Jewish, giving only 4 states a higher Jewish population than Connecticut. Though no urban areas centered in Connecticut have surpassed 1 million people, the state is still one of the most densely populated in the country, due to both its smaller size relative to other states, as well as the presence of many small and mid-sized cities throughout the parts of Connecticut located within the northeast megalopolis. By just population within the city limits, Connecticut's largest city is Bridgeport, home to 144,000 people, followed by New Haven, Stamford, and Hartford. But in terms of population within the entire urban area, the capital city of Hartford slightly surpasses it, home to 924,000 people, compared with the Bridgeport-Stamford urban area's total population of 923,000. This makes Hartford not just the most populous urban area in Connecticut, but the 3rd most populous in New England, after Boston and Providence, as well as the 47th in the country. Its location in the agricultural Connecticut River Valley and along the Connecticut River has made Hartford one of Connecticut's most prominent cities since the state's founding. It's one of the oldest towns in the state, as well as the entire country. Connecticut's largest newspaper, the Hartford Courant, has been continuously published longer than any other paper in the United States, starting in 1764, though the New Hampshire Gazette is older. It's been Connecticut's capital since before Connecticut was even a state, up to its founding as a colony, though it shared capital status with New Haven for several decades. Today, Hartford is a center of the insurance industry, with many major insurance companies, such as Cigna, Aetna, and the Hartford, having their headquarters in the city or its suburbs. This helps give Hartford by far the most prominent skyline in the state. Out of the 25 tallest buildings in Connecticut, 18 are located in Hartford. One of those 7 exceptions is the Otis Elevator Test Tower in Bristol, a town not far from Hartford that's also home to ESPN. The Otis Elevator Test Tower is an entire skyscraper devoted to testing the safety of elevators. The state capitol in downtown Hartford is consistently ranked among the most beautiful state houses in the country. Hartford suffers from a declining population, an issue facing much of the state. Connecticut is one of just 6 states to have had a lower population in 2020 than it did in 2010. And in terms of population decline, it is surpassed by only 2 other states, Illinois and West Virginia. Despite neighborhoods in the state that are among the wealthiest in the U.S., other areas, including parts of Hartford, are far less well off and face issues with poverty and crime. Connecticut's second largest urban area, just smaller than Hartford with a population of 923,000, is a string of cities not far from one another on the southwestern shore of Connecticut, known as the Gold Coast. These cities, many of which function as satellite cities of New York, include Bridgeport, Stamford, Norwalk, and Greenwich, and they're home to many residents who work in New York City and commute across state lines using public transit. Many of these towns, such as Greenwich, are quite wealthy, home to some of New York's richest people. This contributes to giving Connecticut a higher per capita income than any other state in the country. But that is not always the case. Bridgeport, like Hartford, has major struggles with poverty, crime, and job loss, and only one other state has worse income inequality than Connecticut, its neighboring state of New York. A port city on Long Island Sound, Bridgeport, which is home to more people in its city limits than any other Connecticut city, was also the birthplace of the Frisbee, which started off as a pie tin produced by a local pie shop called the Frisbee Pie Company. Though one of Connecticut's largest cities, it has far fewer skyscrapers than Hartford, with many of its residents working in New York. Sitting on Long Island Sound, Stamford's downtown is located just 5 miles from the border with New York. The city is wealthy and highly developed, and unlike much of Connecticut, is actually growing pretty quickly. It's home to numerous high-rises and has perhaps the state's tallest skyline outside of Hartford and New Haven. Fairfield County's proximity to New York and the fact that many of its residents work and spend time in the city has given the Gold Coast and western Connecticut overall a strong cultural connection to New York City, whereas eastern Connecticut has more ties to the rest of New England. This overlap between the influence of New York and New England creates a unique cultural divide within the state, exemplified by the support for either the New York Yankees or Boston Red Sox within Connecticut. The southwestern part of the state strongly favors the Yankees, and the northeast the Red Sox. In between, support is divided between the two, based for the most part on how close each town is to the respective corners of the state. Connecticut's third largest urban area, home to 562,000 people, is New Haven. Home to Connecticut's busiest port and the 57th busiest in the country, the city sits on New Haven Harbor, a large bay in Long Island Sound, where one of Connecticut's longest rivers, the Quinnipiac, meets the ocean. It's home to a decently large skyline centered around the New Haven Green, a beautiful park in the center of the city. It's famous as the home of Yale, one of the most prestigious universities on earth, which helps power the New Haven economy. The city is sometimes referred to as Connecticut's cultural capital, and it isn't hard to see why. The first burger in the U.S. was made in New Haven, and it is home to its very own style of pizza. Out of all the comments all of you left providing information on Connecticut, the state's pizza scene was probably brought up in most of them. New Haven pizza, also known as pizza, is very popular in Connecticut, and Stamford has a major pizza culture as well. As Connecticut is located in New England, seafood is popular there, and many people in the state refer to the sandwich most Americans call a sub as a grinder, a term that's pretty common across New England. The University of Connecticut, or UConn, is famous for its basketball teams, and its women's team is considered one of the best in the country. Politically, Connecticut solidly supports the Democratic Party. Democrats tend to do better among voters living in cities, and Connecticut is a pretty urbanized, densely populated state. The Cook Partisan Voting Index gives it a Partisan Voting Index, or PVI, of D+6. This means that in recent elections, Connecticut tends to vote blue by about 6% more than the rest of the country on average. As of now, the state's governor, both senators, and all 5 representatives are all members of the Democratic Party. However, it's a lighter shade of blue than the rest of its neighbors, perhaps due to southwestern Connecticut's suburban nature, and one of its most well-known politicians, Joe Lieberman, who represented Connecticut in the Senate and nearly became vice president as Al Gore's running mate, won election first as a member of the Democratic Party and later as what he called an independent Democrat. The only president born in Connecticut was George W. Bush, whose political positions are pretty different from those of his state of birth. Though he was born in New Haven and later attended Yale, Bush's family moved to Texas when he was 2. The president with probably the strongest connection to Connecticut was his father, George H.W. Bush, who, though born in Massachusetts, grew up in Greenwich and spent much of his young life there, before deciding to move to Texas. His father, Prescott Bush, started the family's career in politics, representing Connecticut in the Senate. Sorry again that this video took so long. In the future, I'll try to get them out on a bit of a quicker schedule, but they can take a while to produce, so hopefully it was worth the wait. I tried to be pretty thorough, but I know there were definitely things I missed in this video, as there was a lot to talk about. I want to give a big thank you to everyone from Connecticut who helped give me information for this video, leaving detailed and informative comments on YouTube as well as Discord. I truly would not have been able to make this video without all your help. My next video in this series will be on Massachusetts. There will definitely be a lot to go over, and I've only actually been there one time, so I'll need all the help I can get. If you're from Massachusetts, please respond to my community post or my comment here, or leave something in the Discord server to let me know what you'd like to see included about your home state. I especially want to thank everyone who has already joined my Patreon. Through my Patreon, you can access different things such as behind-the-scenes videos, an exclusive Discord Q&A with me, ad-free content, and shoutouts in my videos, which will be shown here. I also really appreciate the nearly 250 of you who have already joined my Discord server. If you haven't joined the Discord server yet, it's a great place to continue conversations about the topics discussed in these videos, interact with fellow viewers, and help provide information about upcoming states in the series. I'll put links to both the Patreon and the Discord in the comments. Thank you for watching this video, and I hope you learned something new. Subscribe for more content like this. I cover the countries, cities, people, and places of the world and beyond. These videos will leave you saying, "That is interesting."